Hello, and welcome to this quiet space we're sharing together tonight. Before we begin our journey into the mysterious, if you enjoy these deep dive sleep stories, please consider subscribing and giving this video a like. It truly helps us continue creating these peaceful explorations into the unknown. Take a moment to settle in wherever you are. Whether you're lying in bed, curled up on a couch, or finding comfort in your favourite chair, let yourself sink into that softness. How was your day? Whatever you're carrying with you right now, stress from work, lingering conversations, that restless energy that sometimes follows us into the evening, it's all okay. You don't need to solve anything right now. You don't need to figure anything out. Tonight we're going to explore one of the most fascinating and controversial stories in modern UFO lore. The tale of Bob Lazar, a man who emerged from the Nevada desert in 1989 with claims that would captivate the world and divide believers and skeptics for decades to come. This is a story that lives in the liminal spaces between science and mystery, between documented facts and extraordinary claims. It's a story that asks us to consider what we know, what we believe, and what might be possible in the vast darkness beyond our small blue planet. But for now, let that curiosity settle into something gentler. Let it become a soft wondering rather than an urgent need to know. We have time. We have this peaceful darkness. We have each other. As we journey through this strange tale together, allow yourself to drift between waking and sleeping, between listening and dreaming. There's no pressure to remember every detail, no test at the end. This is simply time for your mind to wander through fascinating territories while your body finds its way to rest. So take a deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw relax. And let's begin this curious journey into the desert nights of Nevada, where one man's claims would echo through the decades and challenge everything we thought we knew about what might be possible. Part 1. The Encounter. The year was 1989, and Las Vegas was a different kind of city then. The neon still blazed against the desert darkness, but the town had a smaller, more intimate feel. It was in this environment that a local television investigative reporter named George Knapp first encountered a story that would define much of his career and ignite imaginations around the world. Knapp worked for KLAS-TV, Channel 8, and he had built a reputation for serious journalism in a town often dismissed as mere entertainment. He was known for his thorough research and his willingness to explore unconventional stories. When he first heard whispers about a physicist working at a secret government facility, reverse engineering alien technology, he approached the story with the same careful methodology he brought to all his investigations. The source of these whispers was a man named Robert Scott Lazar, though he would become known to the world simply as Bob Lazar. At first glance, there was nothing particularly extraordinary about him. He was in his early 30s, soft-spoken, with dark hair and an earnest demeanour that suggested competence rather than charisma. But the story Bob Lazar told was anything but ordinary. According to Lazar, he had been recruited to work at a facility called S-4, located south of Area 51 in the Nevada desert. This wasn't just any government installation. It was a place where the United States military was allegedly reverse engineering crashed extraterrestrial vehicles. 9 flying saucers, to be precise, housed in hangars built into the mountainside. The story began, as many extraordinary stories do, with a seemingly mundane connection. Lazar claimed he had been recommended for the position by Edward Teller, the famous physicist known as the father of the hydrogen bomb. According to Lazar, he had met Teller at a scientific lecture and impressed him enough to warrant a recommendation for highly classified work. The alleged recruitment process was elaborate and secretive. Lazar described being contacted by mysterious government representatives, undergoing extensive background checks, and signing documents that bound him to absolute secrecy. He was told he would be working on propulsion systems for advanced aircraft, but the true nature of his work, he claimed, was far more extraordinary. When Lazar first arrived at S-4, according to his account, he was shown briefing documents that detailed the history of extraterrestrial contact with Earth. These papers, he claimed, described various alien species, their origins and their interactions with human governments over decades. The documents painted a picture of a long-standing relationship between certain alien civilizations and terrestrial authorities, a relationship kept secret from the general public. But it was the physical craft themselves that truly captured Lazar's attention and would later captivate the world. He described them as smooth, metallic discs, roughly 30 to 40 feet in diameter, with no visible seams or conventional propulsion systems. They appeared to be made of some unknown material that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. The interior of these craft, Lazar claimed, was equally mysterious. The spaces were cramped, seemingly designed for beings much smaller than average humans. There were no right angles, no sharp edges. Everything curved and flowed in organic patterns that seemed almost grown rather than manufactured. The control systems were unlike anything in terrestrial technology, responding to touch in ways that suggested a fusion of machine and some kind of biological interface. What fascinated Lazar most, however, was the propulsion system. According to his account, these craft were powered by a stable form of element 115, a super-heavy element that existed only in theory at the time. This element, when properly manipulated, could allegedly create a localized distortion in spacetime, effectively allowing the craft to fall forward through folded space, rather than pushing through it conventionally. The physics, as Lazar described them, were revolutionary. Rather than fighting against gravity, these craft used gravity itself as a propulsion system. They could manipulate gravitational fields, creating a bubble of altered spacetime around the vehicle. This would explain, he suggested, the incredible speeds and seemingly impossible maneuvers that witnesses had reported in UFO sightings for decades. During his alleged time at S-4, Lazar claimed to have worked on understanding these propulsion systems, attempting to reverse engineer the technology for human use. The work was challenging, he said, not just because of the advanced nature of the technology, but because it operated on principles that human science was only beginning to understand. The security at the facility was intense, according to Lazar's account. Workers were compartmentalized, knowing only what they needed to know for their specific tasks. Communications were monitored, movements were tracked, and the threat of severe consequences for security violations was ever present. Guards were armed and serious, and the overall atmosphere was one of barely contained secrecy and paranoia. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of Lazar's claimed experience was a brief encounter with what he believed to be an extraterrestrial being. In one of his more controversial claims, he described seeing a small grey humanoid figure through a window at the facility. The being was thin, with large eyes and pale skin, matching descriptions that had become common in UFO encounter reports. The sighting was brief, he claimed, but it reinforced his growing understanding that he was working with technology that was genuinely not of this world. As weeks passed, Lazar's alleged work at S-4 continued, but he began to feel increasingly uncomfortable with the secrecy surrounding the project. He claimed to have witnessed test flights of the craft, seeing them perform maneuvers that defied conventional understanding of physics. The vehicles could accelerate instantaneously, make sharp turns without apparent regard for momentum, and hover silently in ways that seemed to ignore the laws of aerodynamics. The element 115 that powered these craft, Lazar claimed, was provided in small amounts by the alleged extraterrestrial visitors. It was stable in its alien configuration, but extremely difficult to work with using terrestrial technology. The elements seemed to be the key to everything, the source of the incredible energy that powered the craft and the foundation of the gravitational manipulation technology that made their impossible flight characteristics possible. But Lazar's time at S-4 was destined to be brief. According to his account, his growing discomfort with the secrecy, combined with what he perceived as inconsistencies in the official story he was being told, led him to make a decision that would change his life forever. He began to consider breaking his oath of secrecy and revealing what he had experienced to the world. The weight of what he claimed to know was becoming unbearable. If his story was true, then the government was hiding the most significant discovery in human history: evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence, advanced technology that could revolutionize human civilization, and proof that we were not alone in the universe. All of it kept secret from the very people who had a right to know. And so, in the quiet of the Nevada desert, Bob Lazar began to contemplate a choice that would make him either one of the most important whistleblowers in history, or one of the most elaborate hoaxers of the modern age. The decision he was about to make would thrust him into the spotlight, subject him to decades of scrutiny, and ensure that his name would forever be associated with one of the most controversial stories in UFO lore. The desert wind blew across the secret installations hidden in the Nevada mountains, carrying with it the promise of revelations that would soon shake the world. Part 2. The Revelation. The decision to come forward was not one that Bob Lazar made lightly. According to his later accounts, the weight of what he claimed to know had become almost unbearable. Night after night he would lie awake thinking about the implications of the technology he had allegedly worked with, the beings he claimed to have glimpsed, and the massive secret that was being kept from humanity. The knowledge sat heavy on his conscience like a stone in still water, creating ripples that touched every aspect of his daily life. He found himself looking at ordinary aircraft differently, knowing, if his claims were true, that technology existed that could make conventional flight seem primitive by comparison. The simple act of watching a commercial airliner lumber through the sky became a reminder of the vast gulf between public knowledge and what he allegedly knew to be possible. Every news report about space exploration, every discussion of humanity's place in the universe, carried an undercurrent of irony that only he could fully appreciate. His first step toward disclosure was cautious and deeply personal. Lazar began talking to a few trusted friends about his experiences, gauging their reactions and perhaps testing his own resolve. These conversations often took place in quiet settings, late-night discussions in living rooms, hushed exchanges over coffee, tentative revelations shared with people he had known for years. He watched their faces carefully as he described the impossible things he claimed to have seen, looking for signs of belief, skepticism, or concern for his mental state. Among these confidants was John Lear, a former CIA pilot and prominent figure in UFO research circles. Lear was the son of aviation pioneer William Lear, inventor of the Learjet, and had spent years investigating claims of government cover-ups and extraterrestrial contact. He had developed his own theories about alien visitation and government secrecy, theories that were often dismissed by mainstream researchers, but had gained a following in certain circles. When Lazar first approached him with his story, Lear recognized the potential significance of the claims and encouraged him to consider going public. Lear's support was crucial during this period of uncertainty. Unlike Lazar's other friends, who listened with varying degrees of belief and concern, Lear had a framework for understanding the story. He had spent years investigating similar claims, and had developed contacts in the UFO research community who might be interested in hearing what Lazar had to say. More importantly, he provided validation for Lazar's growing conviction that the public had a right to know about the extraordinary discoveries being kept secret in the Nevada desert. Through Lear's connections in the UFO research community, Lazar was eventually introduced to George Knapp, the investigative reporter who would become instrumental in bringing his story to the world. Knapp worked for KLAS-TV in Las Vegas and had built a reputation for thorough, credible journalism in a city often associated more with entertainment than serious news. He was known for his willingness to investigate unconventional stories, but he approached each claim with the skeptical eye of a professional journalist. Knapp was initially hesitant to meet with Lazar. He had encountered numerous UFO claims over the years, and most had failed to withstand serious scrutiny. The field was filled with attention-seekers, hoaxers, and well-meaning individuals who had misinterpreted ordinary events as extraordinary encounters. But John Lear's endorsement carried weight. Despite his controversial theories, Lear had legitimate credentials and a reputation for intelligence and competence. When he vouched for Lazar's story, Knapp decided it was worth at least a preliminary investigation. Their first meetings were tentative affairs, held in neutral locations away from the television station. Lazar was nervous, clearly aware of the magnitude of what he was considering. His hands would sometimes shake slightly as he described his alleged experiences, and he would pause frequently to consider his words carefully. There was none of the grandstanding or attention-seeking behaviour that Knapp had come to associate with hoaxers. Instead, Lazar spoke in measured technical tones about the craft he claimed to have worked on and the physics behind their operation. What struck Knapp most during these early conversations was Lazar's apparent scientific knowledge and his consistent storytelling. The technical details he provided were specific and internally coherent, suggesting either genuine expertise or an extraordinarily elaborate preparation for deception. He spoke about gravitational field manipulation, antimatter annihilation, and exotic materials with a fluency that seemed to come from direct experience rather than book learning. As their conversations continued over several weeks, Knapp found himself increasingly intrigued by Lazar's account. The man seemed genuinely troubled by what he claimed to know, and there was no obvious motivation for fabricating such an elaborate story. Unlike many UFO claimants, Lazar showed no interest in writing books, selling merchandise, or building a following. If anything, he seemed reluctant to go public and was clearly aware of the potential consequences of his revelations. Before agreeing to broadcast Lazar's story, Knapp insisted on conducting his own background investigation. He verified Lazar's employment at Los Alamos National Laboratory and confirmed that he had the technical background to understand at least some of the concepts he was describing. While questions would later arise about the exact nature of his work at Los Alamos, the fact that he had worked at the prestigious facility lent some credibility to his claims of involvement in classified government projects. During this period of investigation and contemplation, Lazar made one crucial decision that would add a dramatic element to his story and provide potential evidence for his claims. He arranged for a small group of friends, including John Lear and eventually George Knapp, to accompany him to a remote location in the Nevada desert, where he claimed they would be able to observe test flights of the alien craft he had worked on. The planning for these desert expeditions was meticulous. Lazar claimed to have inside knowledge of the test schedule for the craft at S-4, information that would allow the group to position themselves at the right place and time to witness the flights. He selected a ridge in the desert that allegedly provided a clear view of the area where the tests would take place, far enough from the facility to avoid security patrols but close enough to observe any unusual activity. On a Wednesday evening in March 1989, Lazar led the first expedition into the Nevada desert. The small convoy of vehicles included Lear, several of his associates, and a few other individuals who had been drawn into Lazar's orbit. They drove for hours through the darkness, following back roads and unmarked paths that led deeper into the restricted areas surrounding the secret military installations. The journey itself was an adventure, taking them through landscape that seemed almost alien in its desolation and beauty. The group carried telescopes, cameras, and other observation equipment, hoping to document whatever they might see. As they set up their equipment on the desert ridge, the vastness of the Nevada landscape stretched out before them. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional distant sound of conventional military aircraft. Las Vegas glowed on the horizon like a mirage, its neon brightness a sharp contrast to the pristine darkness of the desert sky. As the hours passed, the group scanned the horizon for any signs of unusual activity. Some members began to wonder if they were on a fool's errand, following the delusions of a man who had constructed an elaborate fantasy. The desert could be a lonely, disorienting place, and the human mind was capable of seeing patterns and meanings in the most ordinary phenomena. But then, according to the accounts of those present, something extraordinary happened that would validate Lazar's claims in the most dramatic way possible. A light appeared in the distance, moving in ways that defied conventional explanation. It was bright, disc-shaped, and seemed to pulse with an inner energy that illuminated the surrounding landscape. The object moved with sudden, sharp accelerations and decelerations, changing direction instantly without any apparent regard for momentum or aerodynamics. The witnesses watched in fascination as the light performed maneuvers that seemed to confirm everything Lazar had told them about the capabilities of the alien craft. It would hover motionless for long periods, then shoot across the sky at incredible speeds before stopping abruptly in a new position. The movements were unlike anything they had ever seen from conventional aircraft, and the silence of the object's operation made the display even more eerie and compelling. George Knapp, the seasoned reporter, found himself torn between excitement and professional skepticism. He had witnessed something that certainly appeared to be extraordinary, but he also knew that the desert could play tricks on observers, and that conventional aircraft could sometimes appear to behave in unusual ways depending on atmospheric conditions and viewing angles. The group returned to these desert vigils several times over the following weeks. Each time they claimed to observe similar phenomena: lights in the sky that moved in impossible ways, craft that seemed to operate on principles unknown to terrestrial science. The consistency of these observations began to convince even the most skeptical members of the group that they were witnessing something genuinely unprecedented. However, these desert excursions did not go unnoticed by the authorities. According to Lazar's later accounts, security personnel from the secret facilities became aware of the group's activities. The consequences were swift and severe. Lazar claimed that he was contacted by his handlers at S-4 and informed that his security clearance was being revoked. The official reason given was that he had brought unauthorized individuals into restricted areas, but Lazar suspected that his growing discomfort with the secrecy of the project had made him a liability. His brief career working on what he claimed was the most advanced technology on Earth was over. Faced with the end of his alleged involvement in the project, Lazar made his final decision to go public. He agreed to appear on George Knapp's television program, though initially he insisted on having his identity concealed. The interview was scheduled for May 1989, and it would mark the beginning of one of the most controversial stories in modern UFO history. The interview itself was a carefully orchestrated affair. Lazar appeared in silhouette, his voice electronically altered to protect his identity. He went by the pseudonym Dennis, and he spoke in calm, measured tones about his alleged experiences at S-4. The story he told was extraordinary, but he presented it with the matter-of-fact demeanour of a scientist reporting on a research project. He described the alien craft in technical detail, explaining the propulsion systems and the physics behind their operation. He spoke about element 115, the stable, super-heavy element that allegedly powered the vehicles, and about the gravitational field manipulation technology that made their impossible flight characteristics possible. His descriptions were consistent with the observations that Knapp and the others had made during their desert vigils. The reaction to the interview was immediate and intense. Phone calls flooded the television station, with viewers demanding more information. Some callers were believers, excited by the possibility that someone had finally come forward with inside knowledge of government UFO programs. Others were skeptics, questioning the credibility of the anonymous source and demanding more proof. But the story was just beginning. The initial interview had been successful enough that Knapp convinced Lazar to appear again, this time revealing his identity to the world. The second interview, broadcast in November 1989, would transform Bob Lazar from an anonymous whistleblower into a household name and a central figure in UFO lore. As the broadcast date approached, Lazar was reportedly nervous but determined. He understood that revealing his identity would subject him to intense scrutiny and potentially serious consequences. Government agencies would investigate his background, skeptics would attack his credibility, and believers would scrutinize every detail of his story. His life would never be the same. But he also believed, according to his later statements, that the truth needed to be told. If his claims were accurate, then the government was hiding the most significant discovery in human history. The people had a right to know that we were not alone in the universe, and that technology existed that could revolutionize human civilization. The night before the interview, Lazar allegedly spent hours reviewing his story, making sure he could present it clearly and consistently. He knew that once he stepped into the light, there would be no going back. He would be forever associated with claims that many would consider impossible, and he would spend the rest of his life defending his account or living with the consequences of what some would see as an elaborate deception. The desert wind continued to blow across the secret installations of Nevada, carrying with it the promise of revelations that would soon echo around the world. In a few short hours, Bob Lazar would step out of the shadows and into the harsh light of global attention, forever changing the landscape of UFO research and government conspiracy theories. The world was about to hear a story that would divide believers and skeptics for decades to come. Part 4: The Science and the Skeptics. In the quiet laboratories and research facilities around the world, scientists began to examine Bob Lazar's claims with the careful methodology that defines their profession. The story he had told was extraordinary, but it was also specific enough to be tested against the established understanding of physics and engineering. What they found was a mixture of intriguing possibilities and fundamental problems that would fuel debates for decades to come. The centerpiece of Lazar's technological claims was element 115, which he described as the fuel source for the alien craft. According to his account, this super-heavy element existed in a stable isotope that could be manipulated to create gravitational effects. The element would allegedly be bombarded with protons in a particle accelerator, causing it to decay and release antimatter. This antimatter would then be used to power the craft's propulsion system through a process that Lazar described in remarkable detail. When Lazar first made these claims in 1989, element 115 existed only in theoretical predictions made by nuclear physicists studying the behavior of superheavy elements. The periodic table at that time extended only to element 109, officially known as meitnerium, and scientists were working to create heavier elements through nuclear synthesis in particle accelerators. The process was extraordinarily difficult, requiring the collision of lighter atomic nuclei at tremendous energies to overcome the natural repulsion between positively charged protons. The fact that Lazar was discussing element 115 before it had been officially discovered was seen by some as evidence that he might have had access to advanced scientific knowledge. Nuclear physicists had indeed predicted the existence of such an element, based on theoretical models of nuclear structure, and they had speculated about its potential properties. However, these predictions were available in scientific literature, and anyone with sufficient background in nuclear physics could have learned about them through conventional research. The theoretical framework that Lazar described for element 115's behavior drew on legitimate concepts from nuclear physics, but his specific claims about its properties diverged significantly from scientific predictions. He suggested that the element could exist in a stable form that would not decay rapidly, allowing it to be stored and manipulated for practical applications. This stability, he claimed, was the key to its use as a fuel source for advanced propulsion systems. Nuclear physicists who examined these claims found them problematic for several fundamental reasons. The forces that hold atomic nuclei together become increasingly unstable as the number of protons increases, creating what is known as the valley of stability in nuclear physics. Elements with very high atomic numbers are predicted to decay rapidly because the electromagnetic repulsion between protons overcomes the strong nuclear force that holds the nucleus together. However, theoretical models also predicted the existence of an island of stability around certain super-heavy elements, where specific combinations of protons and neutrons might create nuclei that are more stable than their neighbours. Element 115 was predicted to be near this island of stability, leading to speculation that some isotopes might have half-lives measured in minutes or hours rather than milliseconds. Even so, these theoretical predictions fell far short of the kind of practical stability that Lazar's claims would require. When element 115 was finally synthesized in 2003 by a team of Russian and American scientists working at the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research in Dubna, Russia, it behaved quite differently from Lazar's descriptions. The newly created element was highly unstable, with a half-life measured in milliseconds. It decayed rapidly into lighter elements through a series of alpha particle emissions, showing none of the stability that Lazar had claimed was essential for its use as a fuel source. The synthesis process itself was extraordinarily challenging, requiring the bombardment of americium-243 targets with calcium-48 ions in a particle accelerator. Only a few atoms of element 115 were created in each experiment, and they existed for such brief periods that studying their properties was extremely difficult. The element was officially named moscovium in 2016, honouring the Moscow region where it was first synthesized. Scientists explained that all super-heavy elements created in particle accelerators are inherently unstable due to the fundamental physics of nuclear structure. The forces holding their nuclei together are overwhelmed by the repulsive forces between protons, causing them to decay almost immediately through various nuclear processes. The idea of a stable isotope of element 115 that could be stored and manipulated was inconsistent with current understanding of nuclear physics and had no basis in experimental observation. Beyond the element 115 controversy, the gravitational propulsion system that Lazar described faced even more significant scientific challenges. He claimed that the alien craft could manipulate gravity waves to create a localized distortion in space-time, effectively allowing the vehicle to fall forward through folded space rather than pushing through it with conventional thrust. This concept drew on real theoretical physics, including Einstein's general theory of relativity and the predicted existence of gravitational waves. Einstein's equations had indeed shown that massive accelerating objects could create ripples in space-time itself, and these gravitational waves had been predicted to travel at the speed of light, carrying energy away from their sources. However, the detection of these waves required some of the most sensitive instruments ever built, and they were not directly observed until 2015, when the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory detected waves produced by the collision of two black holes. The energy scale required to produce detectable gravitational waves was enormous. The collision of black holes, neutron stars merging, or other cosmic catastrophes involving masses comparable to our Sun. The idea that a spacecraft could generate and manipulate gravitational fields strong enough to provide propulsion was far beyond anything that current physics could support. Physicists calculated that even if element 115 could release antimatter as Lazar claimed, the amount of energy produced would be insufficient to create the kinds of gravitational distortions necessary for the flight characteristics he described. The energy requirements for manipulating space-time on a scale useful for propulsion would require the mass energy equivalent of entire stars, not the small amounts of exotic matter that could conceivably be carried aboard a spacecraft. Dr. Robert Llewellyn, a theoretical physicist who had worked on advanced propulsion concepts for NASA, examined Lazar's claims in detail for a comprehensive analysis published in a peer-reviewed journal. He concluded that while the basic concepts drew on legitimate physics, the specific mechanisms described were implausible, given current understanding of natural laws. The idea of using gravity as a propulsion system was theoretically possible, he noted, but would require technology so far advanced that it might as well be considered magic by current standards. The material science aspects of Lazar's claims also attracted detailed scrutiny from specialists in advanced materials research. He described the alien craft as being made of a material that seemed to change appearance when viewed from different angles, suggesting some kind of metamaterial with unusual optical properties. The substance appeared seamless, and showed no evidence of conventional manufacturing techniques like welding, riveting, or molding. Materials scientists noted that while such properties were not available in 1989, advances in nanotechnology and materials engineering in subsequent decades had produced substances with some of these characteristics. Metamaterials with carefully engineered structures could indeed manipulate electromagnetic radiation in unusual ways, creating effects like cloaking or unusual reflective properties. However, the manufacturing of such materials required sophisticated techniques, and typically resulted in substances that were obviously artificial rather than the organic-looking materials that Lazar had described. The skeptical community, meanwhile, focused extensively on the many problems with Lazar's account that went beyond the scientific implausibilities. The lack of educational credentials remained a central issue, with critics arguing that someone without advanced training in physics would be unlikely to understand the concepts necessary for reverse engineering alien technology. The absence of any records from MIT or Caltech was seen as a fatal flaw in his credibility that undermined all of his other claims. Investigative researchers like Stanton Friedman, a nuclear physicist who had spent decades studying UFO phenomena, conducted extensive and methodical investigations into Lazar's background. Friedman had worked on classified projects himself and understood both the culture of government secrecy and the rigorous security procedures that would be involved in any program dealing with extraterrestrial technology. Friedman's investigation revealed no evidence to support Lazar's claims about his education at MIT or Caltech. He contacted alumni offices, searched through phone directories from the relevant time periods, and examined yearbooks and class records. He found no trace of Robert Lazar's presence at either institution. When presented with these findings, Lazar's supporters suggested that his records had been deliberately erased, but Friedman pointed out that such erasures would leave traces and would be extremely difficult to accomplish comprehensively. The investigation also revealed discrepancies in Lazar's account of his work at Los Alamos National Laboratory. While he had indeed worked there, his position appeared to be more limited than his claim suggested. Rather than being a physicist working on cutting-edge projects, records indicated that he had been employed as a technician in a support role, working on relatively mundane technical tasks. Los Alamos officials who were contacted during these investigations confirmed that Lazar had worked at the facility, but described his position as entry-level technical work rather than advanced research. He had been involved in some interesting projects, including work on a particle accelerator, but his role was supportive rather than leading. The revelation that he had worked at the prestigious laboratory lent some credibility to his technical knowledge, but not in the way that supporters had hoped. Despite the mounting challenges to his credibility, Lazar maintained his story with remarkable consistency over the years. In interview after interview spanning decades, he repeated the same details about the alien craft, the propulsion systems, and his experiences at S-4. He seemed unshaken by the criticism and continued to insist that his account was accurate, even as evidence mounted against key aspects of his claims. This consistency was interpreted differently by various observers. Some saw it as evidence of his truthfulness. A man who had stuck to his story despite enormous pressure to recant would presumably have admitted to fabrication if that were the case. Others viewed the consistency as indication that he had simply memorized a fabricated account so thoroughly that it had become real to him, or that he was committed to maintaining a deception regardless of the consequences. Psychological experts who observed Lazar noted that he displayed none of the typical signs of delusional thinking or psychosis. He appeared rational and coherent in his presentations, demonstrated a clear understanding of the distinction between fact and fiction, and showed appropriate emotional responses to questioning and criticism. If he was fabricating his story, they concluded, he was doing so deliberately rather than as a result of mental illness or cognitive impairment. The technological implications of Lazar's claims continued to fascinate both supporters and skeptics well into the 21st century. If his account was accurate, it suggested that humanity was on the verge of accessing technology that could revolutionize transportation, energy production, and our fundamental understanding of physics itself. The prospect of gravity-based propulsion systems could make interstellar travel feasible, while the energy sources he described could solve the world's power needs and transform human civilization. Some researchers began to explore whether conventional explanations could account for the phenomena that Lazar and others had observed in the Nevada desert. Advanced military aircraft, experimental propulsion systems, plasma effects, and atmospheric anomalies were all proposed as possible explanations for the unusual lights and movements that had been reported. The US military was known to test experimental aircraft in the Nevada desert, and some of these projects involved technologies that were decades ahead of public knowledge. The timing of Lazar's revelations was also significant from a scientific perspective. The late 1980s and early 1990s were a period of rapid technological advancement, with developments in computer technology, materials science, and aerospace engineering, creating new possibilities that had previously existed only in science fiction. Some critics suggested that Lazar had simply extrapolated from these emerging technologies to create a plausible-sounding but ultimately fictional account of alien visitation. In the end, the scientific community's response to Bob Lazar's claims reflected the broader challenges of evaluating extraordinary assertions in an age of rapidly advancing technology and expanding scientific knowledge. While his specific claims about element 115 and gravitational propulsion were rejected by mainstream science, the questions they raised about the limits of human knowledge and the possibilities that might exist beyond our current understanding continued to inspire both research and speculation. The technological implications of Lazar's claims continued to fascinate both supporters and skeptics. If his account was accurate, it suggested that humanity was on the verge of accessing technology that could revolutionize transportation, energy production, and our understanding of physics itself. The prospect of gravity-based propulsion systems could make interstellar travel feasible, while the energy sources he described could solve the world's power needs. Some researchers began to explore whether conventional explanations could account for the phenomena that Lazar and others had observed in the Nevada desert. Advanced military aircraft, experimental propulsion systems, and atmospheric effects were all proposed as possible explanations for the unusual lights and movements that had been reported. The timing of Lazar's revelations was also significant. The late 1980s and early 1990s were a period of rapid technological advancement, with developments in computer technology, materials science, and aerospace engineering, creating new possibilities that had previously existed only in science fiction. Some critics suggested that Lazar had simply extrapolated from these emerging technologies to create a plausible-sounding but ultimately fictional account. The role of Area 51 in the controversy added another layer of intrigue to the story. The secret military installation had long been the subject of speculation and conspiracy theories, and Lazar's claims seemed to confirm many of the suspicions that had surrounded the facility. The fact that his story was set in the context of a real, highly classified location gave it an air of authenticity that purely fictional accounts might have lacked. Government secrecy around Area 51 and similar facilities made it difficult to verify or debunk Lazar's claims definitively. The classified nature of the work conducted at these installations meant that official denials carried limited weight. After all, denying the existence of secret programs was exactly what one would expect from agencies involved in classified research. As the debate over Lazar's credibility continued, new technologies began to emerge that seemed to echo some of his claims. Research into metamaterials produced substances with unusual optical properties, while advances in particle physics led to the creation of new superheavy elements. None of these developments vindicated Lazar's specific claims, but they demonstrated that the boundaries of what was scientifically possible were constantly expanding. The cultural impact of Lazar's story extended far beyond the scientific community. His account had captured the public imagination in a way that few UFO stories had before or since. The combination of specific technical details, alleged government secrecy, and claims about extraterrestrial technology created a narrative that resonated with deep-seated beliefs about hidden knowledge and suppressed discoveries. Popular culture began to reflect the influence of Lazar's story. Movies and television shows incorporated elements of his account, and the image of secret government facilities, reverse engineering alien technology became a common trope in science fiction. The story had achieved a kind of cultural permanence, regardless of its ultimate truth or falsehood. In the quiet hours of the night, as scientists around the world continued their research into the fundamental nature of reality, the questions raised by Bob Lazar's claims lingered in the background. Were we alone in the universe? Had governments made contact with extraterrestrial civilizations? Was technology being hidden that could transform human civilization? These questions had no easy answers, but they spoke to deeper human needs for understanding and connection. In a vast universe filled with billions of stars and countless worlds, the possibility that we had been visited by other intelligences offered both hope and wonder. Whether Lazar's story was true or false, it had given voice to these ancient longings and modern uncertainties. The desert wind continued to blow across the secret installations of Nevada, carrying with it the eternal questions that had driven human curiosity since we first looked up at the stars and wondered what might be looking back. Part 5. The Aftermath and the Enigma. As the years passed following Bob Lazar's initial revelations, the man himself began to recede from the public spotlight, but his story continued to evolve and influence the broader conversation about UFOs, government secrecy, and the nature of reality itself. The intense scrutiny that had followed his 1989 television appearance had taken its toll, and Lazar seemed to grow weary of constantly defending his account against skeptics and investigators. In the 1990s, Lazar largely withdrew from the UFO conference circuit and the endless cycle of interviews that had defined his life in the immediate aftermath of his revelations. He moved to Michigan, where he established a scientific equipment supply company called United Nuclear Scientific Equipment and Supplies. The business specialized in selling chemicals, equipment, and materials for legitimate scientific research and education. This career choice was seen by some as evidence of his genuine scientific background, while others viewed it as an attempt to establish credibility in a field where his credentials had been questioned. The company dealt with exotic materials and sophisticated equipment, requiring a level of technical knowledge that suggested Lazar did indeed possess significant scientific understanding, regardless of his formal educational background. However, even in his new life, controversy continued to follow Lazar. In 2006, he was arrested on charges related to aiding and abetting prostitution, stemming from his alleged involvement in a brothel operation in Nevada. The charges were eventually resolved through a plea agreement, but the incident provided ammunition for critics who argued that Lazar's character was questionable and that his UFO claims should be viewed with suspicion. Throughout these personal challenges, Lazar maintained his original story with remarkable consistency. When he did give interviews, which became increasingly rare, he repeated the same details about his alleged work at S-4, the alien craft, and the propulsion systems he claimed to have studied. This consistency was viewed by supporters as evidence of his truthfulness, while skeptics saw it as indication that he had simply memorized a fabricated account. The broader UFO community remained divided about Lazar's legacy. Some researchers continued to cite his account as one of the most important revelations in the field's history, pointing to the technical details he provided and the consistency of his story over decades. Others argued that his lack of verifiable credentials and the absence of physical evidence made his claims untenable. New generations of researchers began to examine Lazar's claims with fresh perspectives. Some focused on the specific technical details he had provided, attempting to determine whether his descriptions of alien technology were consistent with advances in theoretical physics. Others investigated the historical context of his revelations, examining whether they aligned with what was known about government UFO programs and secret military research. The declassification of government documents in subsequent decades provided new insights into the extent of official UFO investigations. Programs like the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, revealed in 2017, demonstrated that the government had indeed been studying UFO phenomena more seriously than previously acknowledged. While these revelations did not vindicate Lazar's specific claims, they did suggest that the government had been less transparent about its UFO interests than it had publicly admitted. In 2018, nearly 3 decades after his initial revelations, Lazar agreed to participate in a new documentary film directed by Jeremy Corbell. The film, titled Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers, provided Lazar with an opportunity to tell his story once again to a new generation of viewers. The documentary also included interviews with George Knapp and other figures who had been involved in the original investigation. The film's release reignited interest in Lazar's story and introduced his claims to audiences who had not been familiar with the original 1989 revelations. Social media platforms buzzed with discussions about the documentary, and Lazar's story once again became a topic of widespread debate. Young people who had grown up in the internet age brought new analytical tools to bear on his claims, while older UFO researchers revisited familiar arguments with renewed intensity. One of the most intriguing aspects of the renewed interest in Lazar's story was the emergence of new technologies that seemed to echo some of his claims. Advances in quantum physics had led to a better understanding of the fundamental nature of space and time, while research into exotic matter and energy had opened new possibilities for propulsion systems. The development of metamaterials with unusual electromagnetic properties had created substances that could manipulate light and other forms of radiation in ways that had previously been thought impossible. While these advances did not validate Lazar's specific claims about alien technology, they demonstrated that the boundaries of what was scientifically possible were constantly expanding. Meanwhile, the search for extraterrestrial life had gained new momentum with the discovery of thousands of exoplanets and the development of more sophisticated methods for detecting signs of life beyond Earth. The possibility that intelligent civilizations might exist elsewhere in the universe had become more widely accepted among scientists, making claims about alien visitation seem less outlandish than they had in previous decades. The technological capabilities that Lazar had described, instantaneous acceleration, sharp turns without regard for momentum and silent hovering, continued to be reported in UFO encounters around the world. In 2020, the Pentagon officially released videos showing unidentified aerial phenomena that appeared to display some of these same characteristics. While the objects in these videos were not identified as extraterrestrial craft, Their unusual flight patterns echoed the descriptions that Lazar had provided decades earlier. As the 2000s progressed, the conversation about UFOs began to shift from the margins of society toward the mainstream. Government officials, military personnel, and scientists began speaking more openly about the possibility that some UFO sightings might represent genuinely unknown phenomena. This cultural shift created a more receptive environment for claims like Lazar's, even as the specific details of his story remained controversial. The element 115 that Lazar had claimed powered the alien craft continued to be studied by nuclear physicists. While the synthesized versions of the element remained highly unstable, research into the theoretical island of stability suggested that there might be isotopes of super-heavy elements that could exist for longer periods. These discoveries did not vindicate Lazar's claims, but they demonstrated that the behavior of exotic matter was more complex than previously understood. Throughout all these developments, Bob Lazar himself remained largely out of the public eye. He continued to operate his scientific supply company and gave only occasional interviews. When he did speak publicly, he seemed somewhat bemused by the continued interest in his story. He had, he said, simply told the truth about what he had experienced, and the fact that people continued to debate his claims decades later was not something he had anticipated. The passage of time had transformed Lazar from a controversial whistleblower into a kind of folk hero for those who believed in government cover-ups and extraterrestrial visitation. His story had become part of the cultural mythology surrounding UFOs, Area 51, and the possibility of hidden knowledge. Whether his claims were true or false, they had achieved a kind of immortality in the collective imagination. In the quiet hours of the night, as researchers around the world continued their investigations into the nature of reality and the possibility of life beyond Earth, the questions raised by Bob Lazar's story remained as compelling as ever. In a universe filled with billions of stars and countless worlds, the possibility that we had been visited by other intelligences continued to captivate and inspire. The desert wind still blew across the secret installations of Nevada, carrying with it the eternal mysteries that had driven human curiosity since we first looked up at the stars and wondered what secrets they might hold. Part 6. The Enduring Mystery. As we reach the end of this strange and winding tale, we find ourselves in a place of questions rather than answers, of possibilities rather than certainties. The story of Bob Lazar has become more than just an account of one man's alleged experiences. It has become a mirror reflecting our deepest hopes and fears about our place in the universe and the nature of truth itself. In the decades since that November evening in 1989, when Lazar first revealed his identity to the world, science has continued to push the boundaries of what we thought possible. Gravitational waves, first predicted by Einstein, have been detected by sophisticated instruments. Quantum mechanics has revealed the strange and counterintuitive nature of reality at the smaller scales. The search for extraterrestrial life has evolved from speculation to serious scientific endeavour. Yet for all these advances, the fundamental questions raised by Lazar's story remain unanswered. Are we alone in the universe? Have extraterrestrial civilizations visited Earth? Do governments possess technology that could transform human civilization? The passage of time has not resolved these mysteries. If anything, it has made them more complex and nuanced. The scientific community's response to Lazar's claims has evolved over the years. While mainstream physicists continue to reject his specific assertions about element 115 and gravitational propulsion, there has been a growing recognition that our understanding of the universe is far from complete. The discovery of dark matter and dark energy, which together make up the vast majority of the universe, has humbled scientists and reminded them that reality is far stranger than we ever imagined. In this context, claims that once seemed impossible have begun to seem merely improbable. The idea that advanced civilizations might have developed technologies based on principles we don't yet understand is no longer dismissed as readily as it once was. The universe is vast, old, and filled with possibilities that we are only beginning to explore. The government's relationship with UFO phenomena has also transformed dramatically since Lazar first came forward. What was once a topic relegated to the fringes of society has become a matter of official government interest. The establishment of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office and the regular release of military videos showing unidentified aerial phenomena have legitimized the study of UFOs in ways that would have been unimaginable in 1989. These developments have created a new context for evaluating Lazar's claims. While his specific assertions about S-4 and element 115 remain unverified, the broader framework of his story, that the government has been more interested in UFOs than it has publicly admitted, has gained credibility. The possibility that classified programs might be studying phenomena that are not yet understood by mainstream science no longer seems far-fetched. The cultural impact of Lazar's story has been profound and lasting. His account has influenced countless books, movies, and television shows, helping to shape popular understanding of UFOs and government secrecy. The image of secret facilities where alien technology is reverse-engineered has become a standard trope in science fiction, while the idea that ordinary citizens might stumble upon extraordinary secrets has become a recurring theme in popular culture. Perhaps most importantly, Lazar's story has served as a catalyst for broader conversations about the nature of truth and the reliability of official narratives. In an age of increasing skepticism about government and media institutions, his claims have resonated with those who believe that important information is being withheld from the public. Whether his specific allegations are true or false, they have contributed to a cultural shift toward greater questioning of authority and official explanations. The personal cost of Lazar's revelations has been significant. His life was forever changed by his decision to go public with his claims, and he has spent decades dealing with the consequences of that choice. The intense scrutiny, the challenges to his credibility, and the ongoing controversy have all taken their toll. Yet he has maintained his story with remarkable consistency, never wavering from his original account even when it would have been easier to admit fabrication. This consistency has been interpreted differently by various observers. Supporters see it as evidence of his truthfulness, a man who has stuck to his story despite enormous pressure to recant. Skeptics view it as indication that he has simply memorized a fabricated account so thoroughly that it has become real to him. The truth, as is often the case with extraordinary claims, may be more complex than either interpretation suggests. As we consider the legacy of Bob Lazar's story, we must acknowledge that it exists in a realm where proof and belief intersect in complex ways. The scientific method demands evidence, reproducibility, and peer review. Yet human experience encompasses phenomena that are difficult to quantify and verify. The gap between these two ways of understanding reality has always been where the most interesting and challenging questions reside. In the quiet of the Nevada desert where this story began, the night sky continues to display its ancient mysteries. The same stars that have inspired human wonder for millennia shine down on the secret installations and restricted areas where the boundaries between known and unknown are constantly being tested. Whether alien craft have visited these remote locations, or whether they exist only in the imagination of witnesses and storytellers, the desert remains a place where the impossible seems possible, and the mundane can transform into the extraordinary. The story of Bob Lazar has become part of the larger human story, our endless quest to understand our place in the cosmos, and to push beyond the boundaries of what we think we know. In a universe that may contain billions of inhabited worlds, the possibility that we have been visited by other intelligences is not merely a matter of scientific speculation, but a reflection of our deepest hopes and fears about connection, isolation, and the nature of existence itself. As you drift towards sleep tonight, consider the vastness of the universe that surrounds us. Somewhere in that infinite expanse, other worlds orbit other stars, and other forms of consciousness may be looking up at their own night skies and wondering if they're alone. The questions raised by Bob Lazar's story, about truth and deception, about hidden knowledge and revealed secrets, about the nature of reality itself, are ultimately questions about what it means to be human in an universe that is far stranger and more wonderful than we can imagine. Whether his claims are true or false, Bob Lazar has given us a gift. He has reminded us that the universe is full of mysteries waiting to be discovered, that the boundaries of the possible are constantly expanding, and that the most important questions are often the ones that cannot be easily answered. In the end, perhaps that is enough. To know that we live in a universe where extraordinary things are possible, where the unknown beckons from beyond the horizon, and where the next great discovery might be just around the corner. The desert wind continues to blow across the secret places of Nevada, carrying with it the eternal questions that have driven human curiosity since we first looked up at the stars and wondered what secrets they might hold. In that wind, in that wondering, in that endless human quest for understanding, the story of Bob Lazar finds its true meaning, not as a definitive answer to the mystery of UFOs, but as a reminder that the universe is far more mysterious and wonderful than we dare to imagine. Rest well, knowing that tomorrow will bring new questions, new possibilities, and new reasons to wonder at the extraordinary nature of existence itself.